I still remember the sound of the rain that night. Not the gentle kind that soothes you to sleep. This one felt angry, heavy, like the sky itself was trying to wash me away. I was standing outside my own house. My suitcase in one hand, a plastic grocery bag in the other, filled with things I'd grabbed without thinking. A few clothes, my old framed photo with Amanda, and the last bit of dignity I had left. Behind the door I could hear them, my daughter and her husband, Chad, whispering. Or maybe arguing. I couldn't tell anymore. All I knew was that the lock clicked from the inside, and the world went quiet. That was it. They had shut me out. My daughter, my only child, had just turned the key on her mother. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I just stood there, frozen, rain dripping off my hair, heart pounding so loud it drowned out everything else. You know how people say pain comes in waves? Well, sometimes it comes in silence, in that one sharp, breathless moment when you realize the life you built, the love you gave, all of it, meant nothing. I don't even remember walking away. My feet just moved. I didn't have a plan. No place to go, no one to call. Just a half-dead phone and a mind replaying that lock sound over and over again like a cruel echo. I found a cheap motel off the highway that night. The kind that smells like cigarettes and old carpet. I paid for one night with the last few bills in my purse. When the door closed behind me, I finally let the tears come. The kind that hurt your chest, that shake your whole body. The kind you cry when you realize you're not going back. I told myself it was temporary. That Amanda would call. That she'd realize what she'd done. But deep down I think I knew. Something had cracked between us long before that night. You see, Chad never liked me. He had that polite smile that never touched his eyes. Always made little comments, subtle, sharp, about how I lived, how I spent, how I interfered. And Amanda, she started to change. Slowly at first. Calls turned into texts. Texts turned into silence. By the time that night came, I was already halfway gone from her life. I just didn't want to see it. I sat on that motel bed, the rain still pounding against the window, and stared at the ceiling. I kept asking myself the same question. How did we get here? How does a mother end up homeless because her daughter says, "It's better this way"? The clock ticked. My phone stayed silent. And for the first time in my life I felt completely invisible. But here's the thing about being left with nothing. It strips you bare. You stop pretending. You stop explaining. And somewhere in that hollow space, something small begins to stir. Spark. I didn't know it yet, but that night, the one that broke me, was also the night I began to rebuild. Because what they took from me wasn't gone. It was only buried, waiting. And when I found it, everything changed. I didn't plan to find it. Honestly, I was just trying to feel close to something, anything. Days had turned into weeks inside that motel room. Time stopped meaning much. The air smelled like dust and disappointment. I tried filling the silence by sorting through the small box of things I'd saved before leaving the house. Some old photos, a few letters, a locket Amanda made me in 3rd grade. But then, at the bottom of the box, hidden beneath a yellowed envelope, I saw it. A small leather-bound book. My mother's old diary. Froze. I hadn't seen it in years. I don't even remember packing it. But something about the way the leather felt in my hands made me pause, like it had been waiting for me all along. I lit the dusty lamp on the nightstand. Its glow flickered weakly, just enough to read the first page. Her handwriting, it hadn't changed. Still neat, looped, graceful. The same handwriting she used for the little notes she used to slip into my lunchbox. "You're my sunshine. You make me proud." I could almost hear her voice again. First, the entries were simple. Ordinary things. Grocery prices. Weather. Gossip from church. But then halfway through I turned a page. And the tone changed. He came again today. He said he wished things were different. That he wished I could be his wife. But he has a family, a name to protect. Margaret must never know. My breath caught. Margaret. Me. I kept reading, my hands trembling. I just pray one day she understands how much I loved her. Even if she was born out of mistake and desire. The words blurred. I blinked hard, but they didn't disappear. I read it again, then again. Each time it sank in a little deeper. My mother had been in love with a man who wasn't hers. A man with a family. And I was the secret. I don't even know how long I sat there. The air felt heavy. My heart pounded so hard I thought it might burst. Every memory I'd ever had of her, her silence, her sadness, the way she used to stare out the window for hours, it all started to make sense. She hadn't been distant. She'd been protecting me. I flipped through more pages. Entry after entry. Hints of meetings at hotels. Cash envelopes she didn't want to accept. Apologies he never stopped making. She never said his name in full. Just initials. HJS. But then I reached one entry that stopped me cold. He said he's made arrangements. That if anything ever happens to him, he'll ensure Margaret has something. A part of what he built. Mr. Goldstein will know what to do. I whispered the name out loud. Goldstein. Rang a bell. I'd seen it before. Somewhere in my mother's old letters, maybe on a business card. It took me 2 days and a dozen failed internet searches on the motel's shared computer, but I finally found him. Leonard Goldstein. Retired estate lawyer. Dallas, Texas. I stared at his photo on the screen, my pulse quickening. For the first time since that night, since Amanda's door closed in my face, I felt something unfamiliar. Not grief. Not anger. Oh, I didn't call. My hands were shaking too much. Instead, I did something I hadn't done in years. I wrote a letter. A real, handwritten letter. I told him who I was. Who my mother was. And I begged, just begged for the truth. Then I mailed it. And waited. What I didn't know was that the reply I was about to receive would change everything I thought I knew about where I came from. And who I really was. 2 weeks. That's how long it took for the phone to ring. 14 days of pacing across the creaky motel floor, replaying every possible version of what might happen. By the time I finally heard his voice on the other end of the line, I almost didn't believe it. Mrs. Louise, the man said. His tone steady but strangely soft. This is Leonard Goldstein. My breath caught. I pressed the phone tighter against my ear. I got your letter, he said. And I knew your mother. Not just professionally. Personally. He paused for a long moment, and I could hear the weight of years in his silence. I always wondered if you'd reach out someday, he added. There's something you need to see. That was all it took. The next morning, I packed what little I owned into a small suitcase and boarded a Greyhound bus to Dallas. I didn't know what I was walking into. A lie, a scam, maybe even disappointment, but something in his voice told me it was real. I sat by the window the whole ride, watching the landscape blur past. Dry fields, long stretches of road. I kept thinking of my mother, her quiet smile, her hidden sadness, and that one line from her diary that wouldn't stop echoing in my head. She must never know. When the bus finally pulled into the Dallas station, my stomach was in knots. His office wasn't fancy. A small 2-story brick building on the corner of an old downtown street. The sign out front read, Goldstein and Associates, Estate Law. I almost turned around right there. But then the door opened. An older man stepped out, thin, silver-haired, with eyes that looked like they'd seen more truths than they could ever tell. Margaret, he said softly. He nodded. He ushered me inside. The office smelled faintly of old books and something else. Nostalgia. Stacks of files lined the shelves. Dust danced in the sunlight spilling through the blinds. Without saying much, he reached into a drawer and pulled out a small, sealed envelope. Yellowed, fragile. This, he said, was given to me by a man named Harold James Sterling. My heart stopped. Those initials, HJS, from my mother's diary. I whispered them under my breath. He asked me to keep this safe, Goldstein said, in case someone ever came forward with proof of who they were. He slid the envelope across the desk toward me. My name was written on the front, in a man's handwriting. To my daughter, Margaret Louise. I stared at it for what felt like forever before I opened it. The paper inside was thin, folded carefully, written in ink that had faded around the edges. If you are reading this, it means I am gone, and that I have failed you in the only way that mattered, by not being brave enough to claim you while I lived. The words hit like a flood. You are my blood, Margaret, my greatest mistake and my quietest pride. I could not give you my name, but I could give you something else, a piece of what I built. I looked up at Mr. Goldstein. My eyes were already burning. He reached into a folder and spread out several documents. Account numbers, property deeds, investment portfolios. It's all yours, he said gently. A trust fund he set up before he died. Small but significant. He wanted you to have it. I didn't say a word. Couldn't. I sat there frozen, staring at the papers. For the first time in my life, I wasn't just the woman who'd been cast out, forgotten, erased. I was someone's daughter, someone's choice. I left his office that afternoon with shaking hands and a heart that felt heavier and lighter all at once. When I got back to my motel, I laid the letter on the bed, stared at the ceiling and whispered to myself, they thought they broke me, but they just woke me up. I didn't know it then, but that moment, that quiet, trembling moment, was the start of my becoming. Because once you learn the truth about where you come from, you start to realize just how much power you've had all along. I didn't go back to Austin right away. Something in me had changed. When I left Mr. Goldstein's office that day, I felt like I was walking in a body I barely recognized. For 58 years I'd lived under someone else's shadow. My husband's, my daughter's, my mother's secrets. And now, for the first time, I saw myself standing in my own light. I checked out of the motel the next morning and booked a week at a small inn in downtown Dallas. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean, quiet. I needed silence, but not the kind that hurt, the kind that heals. I'd sit by the window every morning, sipping coffee, just watching people rush to work, laugh over breakfast, hail cabs. People living. People with purpose. And I remember thinking, I want that again. I want to stop surviving and start living. For years, I had told myself that love was my purpose, that taking care of others was enough. But love without respect, it's like building a home on sand. The first storm takes it all away. I looked down at the envelope on the table, the documents, the letter, the life my mother's secret had left behind. It wasn't just money. It was possibility, power, chance to rewrite the ending. And I wasn't going to waste it. The first thing I did was learn. I spent hours in the library, reading about real estate, investing, trusts, business law. I didn't understand half of it at first, but I kept going. I'd whisper to myself, if you could survive heartbreak, you can survive this too. Then, one evening while scrolling through listings online, something stopped me cold. A small apartment complex in East Austin. A little worn down but solid. The kind of building that had seen stories, held lives. The address looked familiar. I leaned closer. My stomach twisted. It was their building. Amanda and Chad's. I stared at the screen for a long time, my pulse pounding. The property was being auctioned off. The owner had defaulted on taxes. Auction in 2 weeks. I sat there in silence, a dozen emotions warring inside me. Anger, disbelief, heartbreak. But underneath all that, something steadier. Clarity. This wasn't about revenge. Not yet. It was about reclaiming something I had lost. My dignity, my voice, my place in the story. So I called Mr. Goldstein. He didn't ask questions. Just guided me through what needed to be done. We created an LLC. Filed the paperwork. Transferred the funds. The name of the company. Mill Holdings. Margaret Louise. Name. My mother's gift. Our legacy. By the time the auction day arrived, I felt strangely calm. I didn't show up in person. Mr. Goldstein handled everything. When he called me afterward, his voice carried a quiet smile. It's done, he said. You're the new owner. I hung up the phone and sat in silence. For a long time I didn't move. Didn't cry. Didn't laugh. I just let the truth sink in. The same woman they threw out with 2 suitcases now owned the roof over their heads. I whispered to myself, Let's see how it feels when the world tilts the other way. But I wasn't doing this to destroy them. I was doing this to remind myself that I could stand on my own ground, even if it happened to be theirs. I stared out the window that night, the city lights glowing like embers against the dark. And for the first time in months, I didn't feel like a ghost. Felt alive. Because power doesn't always come from shouting. Sometimes it's in the quiet decision to rise, when no one expects you to. And trust me, they never saw me coming. I didn't sleep much after that. Not out of guilt, out of clarity. When you've spent your whole life begging for space in someone else's world, and suddenly you realize the world can belong to you, changes everything. The day the deed came through, I remember holding the papers in my hands and whispering to myself, they'll never know what hit them. I set up a small home office in my new apartment. Clean desk, one lamp, nothing fancy. I printed every document, every receipt, every lease. I studied them like a map of my rebirth. The first thing I changed was the property management. The old company had been lazy, inattentive, letting the place rot under neglect. I replaced them with a team that knew how to get things done, quietly, efficiently. Then I started small. New security cameras, fresh paint in the hallways, locks replaced, garden cleaned. Nothing suspicious, nothing dramatic, just the kind of upgrades tenants love. Except for one detail. Amanda and Chad's unit. Their rent was due for reassessment. Triple the original rate. Fair market value plus overdue fees. Completely legal. I knew what that meant for them. Chad's pride wouldn't let him move. He'd rather choke on his ego than admit defeat. And Amanda, she'd follow him just like always. 2 weeks later, the notices went out. I remember sitting at my desk, sipping tea, imagining the look on his face when he read it. The shock, the anger, the disbelief. I didn't have to imagine long. Amanda called me that same evening. The phone buzzed. Her name flashed on the screen the first time in months. I let it ring. Once. Then voicemail. Mom, I don't know if you've heard, she began, her voice shaky. But something weird's going on. Our rent just tripled. Chad's furious. He's saying things I've never heard him say before. I don't know what to do. Can we talk? I didn't reply. Not out of spite, out of principle. This wasn't vengeance. This was balance. They needed to feel the weight of their choices. The same weight I carried that night on the curb, freezing with nowhere to go. So I stayed silent. A week later, I drove by the building late at night. I didn't plan to stop, but my hands turned the wheel anyway. The lights in their apartment were still on. Through the window, I could see Amanda pacing and Chad yelling. His silhouette cutting through the curtains like a blade. I sat in the car watching for a moment. My stomach tightened, not from joy, but from something darker. The ache of knowing justice doesn't always feel good. I whispered to myself, this isn't punishment. This is consequence. As I drove away, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. I didn't recognize the woman staring back. Her eyes were steady, her jaw set. For the first time, I didn't look like someone's mother, someone's wife, someone's burden. I looked like someone in control. Over the next month, I became someone else entirely. My clothes changed. My posture. My voice. I joined business workshops, small investor meetups. No one there knew my story and I didn't tell them. They saw a poised woman with quiet confidence and money in her pocket. Not a widow. Not a mother abandoned. Just Margaret. And let me tell you something. Invisibility feels different when it's a choice. I learned to wear silence like armor. To walk through rooms where no one knew they were looking at a woman rebuilding her empire from the ashes of humiliation. Every upgrade I made to that building, every door I fixed, every light I replaced, wasn't for them. It was for me. Proof that I could rebuild what they tried to take. Still, some nights when the city went quiet, I'd sit by my window and think of Amanda. Her voice, her laughter, her silence that night. And though I told myself this was justice, a small voice deep inside whispered something else. You still want her to come home. But I pushed it down. Because I wasn't finished yet. And sometimes to heal, you have to let the wound breathe before it can close. It's strange. You can have everything, power, control, money, and still feel hollow. That's what I learned in the weeks that followed. The building was running smoothly now. Repairs finished. Payments up to date. Tenants satisfied. Everything was exactly how I wanted it. Except me. Because every time I passed my reflection, I saw the same thing. Strength on the outside, ache underneath. I had built something out of nothing. But the silence between me and Amanda still echoed louder than any victory I could claim. Then, one afternoon, fate decided to play its cruel game again. Saw her. The grocery store. I was reaching for a carton of milk when I caught sight of her 2 aisles over. Hair pulled back, eyes tired, movements slow, heavy. She looked smaller somehow, like the world had taken a piece of her too. She didn't see me. And I didn't make myself seen. I just watched. Quietly. She moved through the aisles like someone counting every dollar. Her cart was half empty, rice, eggs, off-brand soup. She picked up a box of mac and cheese, stared at it for a few seconds, then put it back. I felt something twist in my chest. Because for all the pain she'd caused me, she was still my child. And watching her struggle hurt more than anything Chad had ever said. I could have walked up to her. I could have said her name. But I didn't. I turned the other way. Not because I didn't care, but because I knew she wasn't ready to face me. Not yet. When I got home that night, I sat on the couch for hours. Didn't turn on the lights. Didn't eat dinner. I just stared at the window and listened to the hum of the city outside. For the first time in a long time, I questioned myself. Had I gone too far? Was this really justice? Or was it just revenge wrapped in reason? I thought about calling her. Just once. Just to hear her voice. But I didn't. Because forgiveness isn't something you force. It's something that finds you, when the pain has done its job. Days passed. Then weeks. And slowly, the reports from the property manager started trickling in. Chad was spiraling. He'd been sending furious emails, threatening legal action, cursing management, calling the new rent rates daylight robbery. He didn't know who owned the building, but he was determined to find out. Amanda, meanwhile, had gone quiet. Neighbors said she was seen sitting outside some nights, just staring at the sky. Once, someone heard her crying on the back steps after a fight. Should have satisfied me. Seeing him unravel. Seeing her realize what he was. But it didn't. Because all I could think about was that little girl who used to crawl into my lap when she was scared. The one who believed I could fix anything. And now, she was stuck in a life that was slowly breaking her. I knew I couldn't interfere. Not yet. This wasn't my lesson to teach. It was hers to learn. But that didn't make it easier to watch. One night I drove by the building again. Parked under the same flickering streetlight. Their windows were dark. No laughter. No light. Just silence. And I remember thinking, sometimes the only thing more painful than losing someone is watching them lose themselves. I drove away, tears blurring the road, whispering to myself, "Not yet, Amanda. Not yet." Because somewhere deep down I knew. When the silence finally broke, it was going to change everything. It happened on a Thursday. The sky was gray, the kind that carries a storm in its bones. I remember because I was sitting by the window, holding a cup of tea that had already gone cold. The city felt too still that day, like the air was waiting for something. Then it came. Knock. Low. Hesitant. Froze. You know how sometimes you can recognize a person just by the rhythm of their knock? That's how I knew. When I opened the door, she was standing there, Amanda. Soaked from the rain, hair stuck to her face, a grocery bag clutched tight against her chest like it was the only thing holding her together. For a second, neither of us spoke. Her eyes looked hollow, red from crying, shoulders sagging under some invisible weight. She looked older than her years, like life had been scraping her down piece by piece. "Hi, Mom," she whispered. 2 words. That's all it took for the ground to shift beneath me. I stepped aside without thinking. She walked in slowly, dripping water onto the floor. The silence between us was thick. I could feel it pressing against the walls. I handed her a towel, then started the kettle again. Felt strange, this routine after all that time. The sound of boiling water, the clink of teacups, the smell of chamomile filling the air. She sat at the edge of the couch like she didn't belong there, like she might disappear if she made a sound. "I don't know where to start," she said finally. I said nothing, just waited. He's not easy," she continued, voice cracking. "He's angry all the time. Blames the rent. Blames me. Blames everything." Her eyes glistened as she looked down at her hands. "I thought I was doing the right thing back then. When we asked you to leave." She swallowed hard. "I told myself I was keeping the peace. Chad said you'd never go unless we pushed you. And I..." Her voice broke. "God, I hate myself for agreeing." The words hung in the air between us, trembling. I could have said a lot in that moment. Could have shouted, demanded why. Told her what it felt like to stand in the cold with nothing but 2 suitcases and a broken heart. But I didn't. Instead, I handed her the cup of tea. We sat there quietly. The steam curled between us like ghosts of everything we hadn't said. "I miss you," she whispered after a long while. "But I don't know how to fix it." Her voice was small, fragile, the kind that comes from someone who's finally run out of excuses. I studied her face. Every line, every flinch. She was searching for forgiveness, but too scared to ask for it. So I gave her the only thing I could. Silence. Because sometimes silence is safer than the truth. We sat like that for nearly an hour. No apologies. No explanations. Just the quiet ache of 2 people realizing how far they'd drifted from each other. When she finally stood to leave, she reached for my hand. "I'm sorry," she said softly. I didn't say it back. But I held her hand a little longer than she expected. When the door closed behind her, I sank into my chair, holding her teacup in both hands, still warm, still full. And in that moment I realized something. Power isn't about control. It's not about revenge. It's about being able to look the people who broke you in the eye and not need to say a single word. But deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Something in her eyes told me that storm she'd been living in, it wasn't done yet. And when it finally hit, it would drag both of us right into the center of it. The silence after Amanda left lingered for days. It wasn't peaceful, it was heavy. The kind that sits in your chest and hums with everything you didn't say. I kept replaying her face in my mind. The way her shoulders curved inward. The way her voice trembled when she said "I miss you." But something else had caught my attention that night. The fear behind her eyes. The kind of fear that doesn't just come from guilt. Comes from being trapped. 3 days later I found out just how right I was. The property manager sent me an email marked urgent. Noise complaint. Unit 3B. Chad and Amanda Harmon. Apparently, the neighbors had heard glass breaking, shouting, crying. The kind of sounds you don't forget. I read that email 3 times. My hands shook so badly I could barely type a response. "Handle it quietly," I wrote. "But make sure she's safe." It took every ounce of strength I had not to drive straight there. But this wasn't my place. Not yet. That night I barely slept. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, counting every minute until morning. At 6 a.m. I got a text from the manager. "He's fine. She's shaken. Apartment a mess. We'll keep an eye on things." Fine. The word made my stomach turn. A man like Chad doesn't leave people fine. He leaves them quiet. And silence can hide a lot of bruises. A few days later, an envelope showed up at my door. No name. No return address. Just my unit number written in jagged handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "I know what you're doing. You think you're clever, but you don't scare me. When I find out who you are, you'll regret it." No signature. But I didn't need one. I knew that handwriting. Seen it on bills. And post-it notes. On the day he wrote my eviction notice like it was a favor. But my heart pounded, not out of fear but recognition. Because in that moment I realized how far this had gone. He was unraveling. I sat at my desk, the letter trembling in my hands. For a long time I just stared at it. The words blurred as I thought back to that night in their kitchen. His smirk, Amanda's silence, the way he looked at me like I was a burden he couldn't wait to shed. And now he was the one falling apart. Should have felt like justice. But all I felt was a strange kind of grief. Because when someone like Chad starts losing control, he doesn't go quietly. He drags everyone down with him. And that included my daughter. So I called my lawyer. Told him everything. Within days, new security cameras were installed across the property. Legal, discreet, professional. Every hallway, every entrance. The tenants were notified of safety upgrades. No one suspected the real reason. Behind the scenes, I made sure every document, every rent receipt, every inspection notice was airtight. I wasn't just protecting myself anymore. I was protecting everyone living under that roof. Meanwhile, Amanda stopped calling. But through the building staff I heard things. That she'd started walking to work. That she sold her car. That sometimes the lights in their apartment stayed off for days. She was living small. Careful. And I understood that kind of fear, the kind where you start shrinking just to survive. One night, I stood by my window, looking down at the street, the city lights flickering like restless hearts. I whispered, "Please, Amanda, find your way out." 'Cause I could fight for her. I could build walls around her. But I couldn't walk her out of the cage she didn't yet admit she was in. Not until she saw it for herself. And deep down I knew. That moment was coming. When it did, it wouldn't just break her. It would set her free. The knock came late. Rain again. Always the rain. It was past 9 when I heard it. Soft, hesitant like before. But this time, something in the sound made my heart race. I opened the door, and there she was again. Amanda. Soaked to the bone, eyes wide, trembling. Her hair clung to her face, and her hands were shaking as she clutched a torn grocery bag to her chest. She didn't even say hello. I stepped aside silently, and she walked in like she didn't trust her legs to hold her up. She sat on the couch, dripping onto the floor, her breathing uneven. I didn't ask questions, I just put the kettle on like always. When I handed her the tea, she didn't touch it. She just stared into the cup, her reflection rippling with every tremor in her hands. Then she spoke. "He's not who I thought he was." Her voice cracked on the last word. "I mean, part of me knew," she continued, staring past me. "But I kept telling myself it was stress, that he just needed time. That if I was patient enough, he'd stop yelling, stop blaming, stop." She stopped talking. Her throat moved like she was trying to swallow something sharp. "He's obsessed now. He thinks someone's targeting us. He's been going through my phone, my emails. Last week he followed me to work. Said he was protecting me." Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Then he asked if you were hiding something." My heart clenched. I didn't answer. Didn't move. She looked up at me. Eyes swollen, desperate. I didn't expect her that night. Honestly, I'd started to believe she wouldn't come back. But the storm outside said otherwise. Rain lashed against the windows. The wind howled like it was warning me. And just as I set my cup down, I heard it. Another knock. Not soft this time. Desperate. When I opened the door, she was standing there again. Amanda. Drenched. Shaking. Eyes red and swollen, like she'd run through every mile of her pain just to get here. She didn't say a word. Just stepped inside and stood there, clutching a grocery bag to her chest. I could hear her breathing, fast, uneven, like someone holding back a scream. I handed her a towel. She didn't take it. Just sank onto the couch, dripping rainwater onto the floor. Her hands were trembling. "He's not who I thought he was," she said finally, voice hollow. I didn't move. Didn't interrupt. I knew, she whispered. Part of me always knew. But I kept telling myself he'd change. That if I just stayed patient, if I kept loving him enough, maybe he'd stop being angry. Her voice cracked. But he didn't stop. He just found new ways to aim it. My throat tightened. She stared into her hands. "He's been losing it, Mom." Talking to himself. saying someone's after him. Going through my phone, my emails. Last week, he followed me to work. Her lip quivered. He thinks someone's targeting us. That I'm hiding something. Then her eyes lifted right into mine. If you are hiding something. The words hung in the air, sharp, trembling. I felt my heartbeat stutter. She exhaled, broken. He asked if I was in on it. Said I was working with whoever owned the building. Said it was all a setup. I swallowed hard. What did you tell him? She looked down. That I hadn't spoken to you. That I didn't even know where you lived. Then quietly. That was a lie. For a long time neither of us spoke. The clock ticked in the background. The rain pounded the windows. I found your name, she said finally. On a security notice. Same management company. Same mailing address. I figured it out. Her eyes filled again. It wasn't hard. You wanted me to, didn't you? I didn't answer. 'Cause she was right. A part of me had wanted her to know. I miss you, she whispered. But I don't even know how to be around you anymore. My hand tightened around my mug. You left, I said, my voice low. She flinched. I know. No, I said. You didn't just leave, Amanda. You stood beside him. You watched. Her lips parted. Her eyes filled with something that looked like shame and fear all tangled together. I didn't think it would get this bad, she said. I thought I could manage him. I shook my head. You can't manage a man like that. You survive him. Or you leave him. The silence between us stretched until it almost broke. Then she whispered, I don't expect forgiveness. I just needed to remember what it felt like to be safe. Those words cracked something open in me. I walked her to the door. She turned suddenly and wrapped her arms around me. Shaking. For a moment I didn't move. Then I did. Gently. Cautiously. Like holding a fragile memory that might vanish if I breathed too hard. When she pulled away, she didn't say goodbye. She just looked at me like she was seeing me for the first time. And then she was gone. The door clicked shut behind her, but her scent, rain and sorrow stayed. I sank into the chair, heart pounding. Because I knew that hug wasn't the end. It was the beginning of something else. Reckoning. And this time it wouldn't just be emotional. It was about to get real. The invitation went out on a Tuesday morning. Polite. Professional. Harmless. Tenant meeting regarding property renovations. Mandatory attendance. That was all it said. No details. No hints. Just enough to make people curious. I knew Chad would come. He couldn't resist a confrontation, especially if he thought it might give him someone to blame. The meeting was scheduled for Friday evening. In the common room of the building he thought he ruled. I arrived early. Hair loose around my shoulders, a charcoal blazer, dark jeans. Simple, elegant. Nothing like the woman who once begged for kindness at his kitchen table. As tenants trickled in, they nodded politely, unaware that the woman sitting quietly near the back was the one signing their leases. And then he came. Red-faced. Jaw clenched so tight you could see it from across the room. Amanda trailed behind him, eyes down. Her hand brushing the wall as if steadying herself. He didn't even glance at me. Just stormed up to the property manager at the front. Where is she? He barked. The person in charge. I want a name. I want a face. The manager, calm as ever, replied. All questions will be addressed at the end of the presentation. Chad scoffed, loud enough for everyone to hear. Unbelievable. The meeting started. Slides on new security systems. Landscaping improvements. Hallway repairs. Roof insulation upgrades. Every change funded, ironically, by his inflated rent. And then the manager said it. We'd like to extend our gratitude to ML Holdings for their commitment to revitalizing this community. The owner is here tonight, should anyone wish to ask questions. Silence. Then slowly I stood. Every eye turned toward me. The sound of the chair scraping the floor was the only thing in the room. Good evening, I said. My name is Margaret. For a moment no one breathed. Then Chad turned. Confusion first, then disbelief, then rage. You, he spat. This is a joke. I met his eyes. Shaken. No joke. Just business. His face reddened. You manipulated this. You raised our rent. You're trying to ruin us. I gave you a home, I said softly. I made improvements. I treated every tenant the same. What I didn't do was forget. He took a step forward. Amanda reached for his arm, whispering, Chad, stop. But he wasn't listening. You think you've won, he hissed. You made an enemy. I tilted my head slightly. No, Chad. You made yourself one. The day you looked me in the eye and treated me like I didn't matter. He froze. The words hit him harder than I expected. Amanda moved between us then, trembling but strong. Chad, stop, she said again, louder this time. She's not your enemy. She never was. He turned to her, eyes narrowing. What did you just say? Her voice shook, but she didn't back down. I said, stop. You've done enough. For a second no one moved. Then Chad muttered something under his breath and stormed out, slamming the door so hard the walls shook. The room stayed silent. Amanda stood there, tears in her eyes, then turned to me. I didn't know, she said softly. About any of it. The building, the money, the truth. I know, I said. She swallowed. Why didn't you tell me? Because you had to see it, Amanda, I said quietly. Not just hear it. Her lips trembled. You deserve better. No, I said. You do. You just forgot how to ask for it. Her face broke then, the mask of guilt, fear, shame all cracking at once. And in that single moment, standing there in the room where I had once been humiliated, I didn't feel like a victim anymore. Felt whole. For the first time in my life, I didn't need to raise my voice to be heard. I just stood there, calm, grounded, free, and that was enough. The meeting ended quietly. People thanked me for the improvements. The manager shook my hand. Amanda lingered by the door, staring at me like she was trying to memorize something, the shape of who I'd become. And as I watched her leave, I realized something simple. This was never about revenge. It was about balance. About teaching the world, and myself, that even when they erase you, you can still write yourself back in bold. And I had. But it wasn't over yet. There was still one final truth Amanda hadn't discovered. And when she did, it would change everything again. 4 days later there was another knock at my door. But this time I knew it wasn't a storm waiting outside. When I opened it, Amanda stood there again. No makeup, no trembling. Just quiet resolve. And in her hands, she was holding something that made my knees go weak. My mother's diary. The leather was cracked, the pages worn soft at the edges. I hadn't even realized it was missing. I found this, she said. Her voice was steady but soft. You must have left it behind the last time I was here. She held it like it was something sacred. And for me it was. I stepped aside. She walked in slowly, just like before. This time, the air between us didn't feel heavy. It felt charged. I read it, she said quietly. Froze. I wasn't trying to pry, she continued quickly. But I recognized her handwriting. And once I started reading, I couldn't stop. She set the diary on the table, gently, like it might break. I didn't know, she whispered. About Harold Sterling. About the trust. About any of it. He nodded. I didn't either. Not until I had nothing left. Amanda's eyes filled. Why didn't you tell me? I looked at her for a long time before answering. Because I didn't think it would matter to you then. You had your life, your home. I was just noise. She shook her head, tears spilling over. No, Mum. I was wrong. I was so wrong. She dropped onto the couch, her hands twisting together. When I read her words, Grandma's, I realized how much she carried for you. How much she hid just to protect you. And I thought, that's what you were doing too, weren't you? Protecting me. I swallowed hard. I tried. Amanda looked up. I don't know how I became the kind of daughter who could throw her mother out. I walked over to the window. The late afternoon light was soft, golden. The kind that makes everything look a little kinder. You didn't become her all at once, I said. It happens in small ways. Every time you choose peace over truth. Every time you call cruelty stress. Every time you love someone so much you forget what love is supposed to feel like. Amanda stood then, tears running freely down her face. I left him, she said. The words hit the room like thunder. She went on, her voice trembling but strong. He tried to go through my things again. My laptop, my phone. I told him no. He screamed, packed a bag, said he'd be back. I changed the locks the next day. I turned to her slowly. You sure? She nodded. I don't know who I am without him. But I'd rather find out than keep disappearing. Something inside me cracked, but this time it wasn't pain. It was pride. We sat down together. The diary lay open between us. 3 generations of women in a single room. I used to dream of hearing those words from you, I said softly. But hearing them now, it doesn't erase the past. It rewrites it. She frowned. Rewrites it. I smiled faintly. 'Cause now you see me. And when someone truly sees you, the real you, everything before that moment changes meaning. She wiped her eyes. You didn't raise me to be weak, she said. He nodded. You just forgot how strong you were. For the first time in years, the silence between us didn't hurt. It healed. She stayed a while that evening. We didn't talk about Chad. We didn't talk about the past. We just sat there. 2 women relearning how to breathe in the same room. When she left, she hugged me again, tighter this time, longer. And as the door closed behind her, I looked at that diary one last time, my fingers tracing my mother's handwriting. 3 women, 3 silences, 3 stories that refused to stay buried. I didn't know it then, but the next letter that would arrive at my door would be the one that finally closed the chapter for good. Came in the morning. No return address. No name. Just a plain white envelope slipped under my door. For a moment, I thought it might be from Amanda again. Maybe a thank you, maybe something she couldn't say out loud. But the moment I unfolded the paper, my stomach turned. The handwriting. Jagged. Heavy. Angry. We need to talk now. I know everything about the building, the inheritance, Sterling, all of it. You think you're clever. You think you can ruin my life and walk away smiling. If you don't undo this, I'll go to the press. I'll tell them everything. Your mother's affair. Well, lies. Let's see how your reputation holds up when the truth's out there. I stared at those words, feeling nothing at first. Just quiet. He had finally pieced it together, the names, the trust, the inheritance, the one thing that connected it all. But fear. Well, I'd already lived through fear. This time I felt something else. Strength. I'd been waiting for this moment since the day he threw me out of that kitchen. Since the day he looked at me like I was disposable. So I didn't reply. I didn't scream. I didn't even crumple the letter. I just forwarded his message, every word, to my attorney. By the next morning, Chad Harmon received a cease and desist letter so airtight he couldn't breathe through it. Every email, every fake law firm inquiry, every property record he'd tried to manipulate, all documented, all traced, all connected back to him. The defamation threats, the falsified documents, the harassment reports from tenants, the building cameras that caught his late-night rants in the parking lot. We had it all. It was like watching a man sink in quicksand he had poured himself. I didn't want to destroy him. That wasn't my goal. I just wanted the truth to stand, tall, untouchable. And when the legal papers hit his inbox, I imagine he finally understood what that meant. Amanda called 2 days later. He's gone, she said, voice trembling. He packed while I was at work. Left a note saying he's being hunted. Said you ruined his life. I exhaled softly. He ruined his own. Silence hummed through the phone. Then she whispered, I'm sorry. For every time I thought he deserved my silence. I smiled, small but real. You were scared, I said. I've been there. Fear makes you small, but you don't have to stay that way. For the first time she didn't cry. She just said, I won't. After that, the noise quieted. Chad tried to claw his way back through social media. Vague posts about betrayal, corruption, injustice. But he never named names. He couldn't afford to. Because after the second letter from my attorney, he finally understood. Every word he uttered carried a price. And this time, I wasn't the one who would pay it. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was peace. Heavy earned sacred peace. Amanda started to bloom in that quiet. She moved out of the apartment, found her own place. A small studio near her job. She sent me a picture one day. White curtains, a plant in the window, sunlight spilling across the floor. Her message said only, "I'm learning to breathe again." She saved it. Later, she told me she joined a community art class, started therapy, and even painted something for me. An abstract of a phoenix, rising from red and gold. I hung it over my fireplace. It wasn't just art. It was proof that we had both risen. Then, one morning another letter came. But this one wasn't from Chad. It was from Mr. Goldstein. "Congratulations, Margaret. The building has been fully transferred. The final tenants have signed. The lawsuit is settled in your favor. You are now free to sell, hold, or restructure as you see fit." I sat down, holding that letter to my chest. Free. That word had never felt so heavy or so light. But I wasn't done yet. Not quite. Because the last step in healing isn't revenge. It's release. And I knew exactly how I was going to do it. I sold the building in late spring. There was no ceremony, no grand announcement. Just a quiet click of a pen, a firm handshake, and 3 years of grief, betrayal, and silence finally exhaling into the world. When the funds hit my account, I didn't feel the rush I thought I would. No victory. No celebration. Just stillness. I sat at my kitchen table that night, staring at the numbers on the screen. The kind of numbers that once would have felt impossible. But all I could think about was how many nights I'd fallen asleep hungry, counting coins for dinner, believing I'd never get back up again. And yet here I was. Not broken. Not bitter. Just free. The next morning I wrote 2 checks. The first went to a local shelter for women and children. The kind of place I wish I'd known about the night I stood on that curb, holding 2 suitcases and shaking hands. I asked them to build a new wing. And I asked them to name it the Eleanor House. After my mother. The woman who'd carried her own secrets, her own pain in silence. So I could one day learn to use mine as strength. The second half I used to buy a small home. Nothing fancy. A 2-bedroom cottage on the same street where I grew up in Cedar Park. Trees out front. Porch swing. A kitchen that smelled like sunlight in the morning. It was the kind of place where healing didn't have to be loud. Where I could breathe. The day I moved in, Amanda helped me unpack. She didn't say much. Neither did I. But when the last box was emptied, she sank beside me on the porch swing, legs tucked under her like she used to when she was little. "I remember this street," she whispered. "Before everything got complicated." I smiled faintly. "You were always safe here." She nodded, her voice breaking just a little. I forgot how that felt. We didn't talk about Chad. We didn't need to. His story had already ended. No outburst. No confrontation. Just silence. The kind that swallows a man whole when the truth finally stops running from him. Last I heard, he'd left town. No forwarding address. No new beginnings. Just another shadow disappearing into its own mistakes. Amanda stayed for dinner that night. We made grilled cheese and tomato soup like we used to when she was small. She burned one side. I teased her for it. We laughed until our stomachs hurt. It wasn't a perfect night. But it was real. And that was enough. Later, after she left, I stood by the window with a cup of tea. The moonlight stretched across the lawn, soft and forgiving. And I whispered the words I'd been afraid to say for years. Not to Amanda. To myself. "I forgive you." Because that's the hardest part, isn't it? Not rising from the ashes. But realizing. You were never the fire they tried to extinguish. You were the spark they underestimated. They taught me silence was weakness. But I learned how to make silence my armor. They tried to erase me. And I became unforgettable. I sat down on the couch, opened my mother's diary one last time, and slipped a note inside for Amanda to find someday. You don't need their love to be worthy. You don't need their approval to be strong. You only need the truth, and to never ever forget who you are. The clock ticked softly in the background. My tea grew cold between my palms. But my heart, it was warm. I didn't need to win anymore. I didn't need anyone to lose. I just needed to be. And for the first time in a long, long time, I was home. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe, and if you've lived through something similar, share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.